All right, welcome everyone to the Mac and Fish podcast. I'm Coach McKinley Roll. Here are my co-hosts, Charles Fishbine, better known as Fish. Fish, what's going on?
What's up?
All right, we're also here with our co-host, Corey Long. Corey, what's up?
How you guys doing?
All right, doing good. We're on our college football roundup. But before we start, wanted to tell our listeners you can follow us on Twitter at Mac and Fish Podcast, as well as listen to us on SoundCloud, YouTube, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcast. Give us a like and a high rating. We really appreciate that. Thank you in advance. But jumping into this week, fellas, we had an interesting week of college football. Big Ten is back. Let's jump right into it. Corey, what are your thoughts on it?
I was joking with Fish earlier in the week when I was like, this is like phase 3 of college football now. We get the Big Ten, like we keep getting different phases as they kind of jump in and jump out. But I watched a lot of the Ohio State game. They, it took them a minute to get going, but once they did, you saw that they were the class of the Big Ten. I saw really fun bits and pieces of a Penn State-Indiana game with Penn State, just needing to play some situational football to win that and not doing it and them losing because of it. And, and I saw the night game, and Michigan looked really, really impressive. I mean, they probably really, Michigan stood out to me, definitely. And Nebraska stood out to me for the wrong reasons.
I got you. Fish, what are your thoughts?
It's become it's almost like the Royal Rumble college football, of like wrestling. The slappies come running in first, and then all of a sudden we start to get the good guys running into the ring, and you get the SEC, you have the ACC, you got now the Big Ten. And all that's left is really the Pac-12. But yeah, the Big Ten, there was not a whole lot of surprises other than a couple of the bottom teams in the last couple of years. Rutgers upsetting Michigan State, Schiano coming back and winning. I don't think Rutgers has won a Big Ten game since 2017. They weren't even competitive. It just shows, Schiano, what type of coach he is and what type of program he's going to build back there. One of the upsets this weekend was Purdue beating Iowa. Jeff Brom had a team last year that didn't win a lot of these type of games. And then you look at Northwestern just trounced Maryland. And I thought personally, though, the most impressive win, and I mean, we already knew what Ohio State could do, but this is the most impressive win, I believe, for Michigan in the Jim Harbaugh era there in Ann Arbor. And maybe it was part of the reason was Don Brown came on our show and he got some good karma. You always want that good karma, but we may have to. We're unlike the SI Jinx. Maybe you come on the show and good things start to happen. But it was an impressive win, and they did it with. It looks like he finally found himself a quarterback. And I'm sure we'll discuss that more. But that's the one thing they've lacked the last couple of years. They've had all the moving parts. The one part they haven't had is a quarterback position, and it looks like they finally found one in Joe Milton. Who looked pretty darn good the other night.
Yeah, he did. It's funny you mentioned Rutgers. I was looking at now Michigan State had a 6-game win streak. Here's how bad Rutgers had been. The scores on that said I think there was a 49-0 in here. Michigan State won 27-0 last year, 45-3, 40-7. Like the games weren't even close. And all of us, in one year have to lose at 27-0. They come in there and win that game. So good on Greg Schiano, who definitely has the magic when it comes to coaching in New Brunswick.
No doubt.
He should pretty much have a lifelong contract with Rutgers football at this point.
Well, talk about the Big Ten. I like you guys were talking about. We're excited to see them back. Couple of things stuck out to me. Obviously, being a New Jerseyan, being born and raised there, very happy to see Rutgers get a big win. Like you said, Fish, first Big Ten win since 2017. Michigan State has 7 turnovers. I don't think you can win a game that way. I mean, that's terrible. But kudos to Rutgers, right, for short fields and capitalizing on that. Obviously Michigan's big win over Minnesota was very impressive. Coach Brown, like Fish, you said, you come on the Mac and Fish podcast. Hey, good karma, baby, good karma. And defense was humming. You saw the players he talked about during the podcast actually showed up, and that was great. Michigan dominated on the ground with 250 plus on the ground, and they had no turnovers. I mean, that is a very good football team. Minnesota is a very good football team. That's not an easy first game to come into. Usually teams like to get games that they can kind of get their, feet under them and want a kind of a warm-up type of game. But they came with two ranked teams, and that was a very impressive game. But the biggest upset of the weekend was actually Indiana over Penn State. Great game, double overtime. And we'll talk about it later, but that quarterback, Floridian, Penix, at the end of the day, Indiana, it was a huge upset. And I think anyone predicted that game to go like that. So,
Indiana's been, they've played Penn State pretty close.
Yeah.
Over the last, Tom Allen's done a really good job.
Absolutely.
Of getting, it's ironic. Part of the reason why, Michael Penix is there because, he had that relationship with Tom Allen when Tom Allen was a coach around here, both at in Tampa area high schools and at USF. So, he's done a good job of recruiting and, and, understanding how Indiana's going to make a mark in the Big Ten. They're going to play a little bit more exciting brand of football, a little more up and down. They're going to spread things out. He's going to recruit a little bit more in the Southeast. I think in general, he's done a good job at getting in some good talented players. But, it's ironic. The only reason they really have a chance to win that game is because the Penn State running back scores a touchdown.
Yeah.
If he doesn't score a touchdown late, they can probably at least run the clock down into, the teens and force Indiana to go about 70 yards with no timeouts and about 10 seconds to get a field goal. So it was really funny. And there was, I know there was some controversy with the 2-point conversion there and, and there's controversy in I think Auburn's got, it's the third week in a row they got a ref call. So, refs are just struggling. Refs are struggling across the board right now. So,
but you have to say though, that's an impressive win. I don't think anyone thought Indiana was going to beat Penn State. A ranked top 10 Penn State team. That's a very good football team. Kudos to Coach Allen and Indiana Hoosiers, and kudos to DMAC. One kid I was on the squad when I was at Garden City coaching out there. Really proud of that kid.
Yeah. I'm going to just jump in real quick. I think one of the things, we talked about is when you're trying to build a program like Indiana is you have to get great on one side of the ball. I almost think you got to accept that one side you're going to be really good on, one side you're not, because you just can't recruit enough great players. And it started with Coach Wilson. He got the offense going. Tom Allen came from that staff. You look at the players, Michael Penix is a Florida kid. Wap Filer came from Tampa. Had 5 rushes for 36 yards and a touchdown. Their 4 leading tacklers, Michael McFadden, who's a Tampa kid, all 4 of their top tacklers are all from Florida. So I know you guys think I'm a little biased towards the Florida kids, but here's a team.
Not a little, you are.
Here's a team that's come down and realized, hey, listen, we could find second-tier players that could play at a high level. Right. And a lot of these kids, they come from programs that have won state championships. They're winners. So they go to a program like Indiana, and they can help turn it around.
So, Fish, hold on real quick, Corey. My question to you, let's hop in here, right? And I know we're going to jump around. We're going to talk about them later. But wouldn't those same kids be suited at a place like Florida State right now? Like, that's what I think is kind of missing. You don't have to, again, we're going to talk about Florida State a little bit later in our discussion here, our roundup. But those type of kids are leaving the state, going to Indiana, and are being productive. I think that says a lot.
Well, when you look at Michael Penix and you look at Milton, who's a quarterback at Michigan, he was right down. Here's a guy that's 6'5", 220. I had him as probably a top 20 prospect in the state. Florida doesn't get enough credit, honestly for quarterbacks. It kind of gets overlooked because a lot of these kids don't have a ton of quarterback coaches and they're not part of passing leagues like kids in Texas and California. But for some reason, you go look across college football. Northwestern had one a few years ago. A lot of these kids leave the state, and I always say, why don't you take one of these guys as a second quarterback in your class? They're locally. They're most likely going to stick it out and not transfer. So if the guy that you recruited doesn't pan out, at least the second guy, there's not that much of a drop off in talent. And that's a big thing. Some of these guys rather just have nobody behind. And you look what's happened. We're going to talk about Florida State. They had a guy in James Blackman that they had, and they didn't recruit behind him. And we could blame whoever we want for it. I know there's a bunch of excuses, but I think a way to alleviate that moving forward is take one of these guys. And there's a couple guys this year in the state of Florida. Take one of them as a backup. I mean, it's not going to scare the top guy away. I mean,
Correct.
It's just not. If it does, then that guy, you're recruiting the wrong guy if he's
Correct.
worried about a guy that's basically a developmental prospect. But I'm of a belief, take as many quarterbacks as you can every year because, one, you never know. One of these guys may end up having to play, and it's better than the other options you would be left with if you didn't recruit them.
Yeah.
And, and Tom Allen has a lot of experience in recruiting this state. I mean, when he was at Ole Miss in the early 2010s, he recruited Florida. He recruited the same type of players when his year at USF. Then when he went to Indiana, he basically recruited the same players he recruited to Ole Miss to USF to Indiana. It's really the same pool of kids that, we like to say is, definitely probably, a notch below the elite kids, but still kids that can definitely play at the college football level and play at a high level. So, and then you can run into a Michael Penix, who I think was a player that, a little bit of an overachiever, had a really good high school career. I thought he could have been, that number 2 quarterback taken at a bigger program, but, he decided to bet on himself and get into a situation where he could play. And, and it's worked out for him. So, a lot of it is just what I like about Tom Allen, what he's done in Indiana is he's stuck. And this leads into what I don't like what Scott Frost is doing at Nebraska. But what Tom Allen is doing is he's sticking to his strengths as a coach. He's putting him around players he's familiar with. He's sticking with what has always worked for him. And if it works, that's good. It's working at Indiana. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but it's not because he's not doing something that's not familiar to him. He's not going outside of his comfort zone. So I really, I think that's good for him that he's found a process that can work, that can keep Indiana competitive. And it's something that he's familiar with. The players that he brings in, they come from programs, they play a style of football that he's familiar with.
So you put a little teaser in there. So what don't you like about what Frost is doing at Nebraska?
I just think, sometimes marriages just, sometimes marriages don't work, and it's not really the fault of anybody. It's just that they're just not the right people for each other. I think, obviously Frost has history in Nebraska. He was a quarterback there, won a national title there. His coaching career took him to Oregon, and he learned that Oregon style under Bellotti, under Chip Kelly. Then he goes to UCF, and you can bring Oregon style football to Florida. It's the same thing. It's speed, it's fast, it's skilled players, it's dynamic. You can't bring that to Nebraska. You just don't have the same pool of talent to do that. And him trying to bring that Oregon, that UC fast style to Nebraska, it's exciting. It sounds good, but when you don't get the players, this is what you end up with. You end up with, it looks like, as my friend Tom Lugan used to say, it looks like a goat rodeo. It looks like, a bunch of guys going in different directions, not sure what's happening, and they just look confused. And the quarterback, I think, is pretty talented, Martinez, but they can't supplement that with the players needed for them to move forward. And, and Fish and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. The area in Nebraska where you can recruit, you can get linemen, you can get tight ends, you can get, you go, whether you're in Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska, you can get linemen and tight ends in those areas. You can get good ones. But you need, but their offense needs to be based around running backs and a running game and being powerful and being a powerful team. And they're not that right now. They're not only not fast, they're not dynamic, they're not even physical. So it's just, there's so many things wrong with it. And again, it's not to say that Frost is a bad coach. I think this is just a bad fit for him. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take him more than just, I think it's going to be a third losing season. And no one's going to admit it right away that this just isn't working out. But I don't see where it's going to turn around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is crazy to me, because I look at it and, again, when I was out there at Garden City, we had Dedrick Mills, who was one of the best running backs that I've ever been around and seen. And he's at Nebraska, and that kid can run, he's strong, powerful, everything else. But like you said, something's not mixing there. But I think it's a combination of everything, Corey, like you talked about. I just don't think they're getting the caliber of talent yet at Nebraska. If he gets the talent level, because Urban brought Florida style and his spread to Ohio State. Now it was a power spread, right? But he brought his scheme to Ohio State and was able to incorporate it and win right away. I don't think it's not possible. I just don't think Nebraska right now is getting the caliber of player.
I think it's more possible at Ohio State than Nebraska, because at Ohio State, Urban recruits nationally. I mean, there's no border for Ohio State recruiting. So he could bring in the top player. When I looked at his old classes at Ohio State, he was bringing in the top linebacker from Georgia and play. Like, he can bring him into Ohio State. It's just a national brand. Nebraska was built on a style of football, and everybody has tried to change it. Bill Callahan tried to change it. He failed. The guy that was at Oregon State and in Nebraska came in and tried to change it. He failed. Bo Pelini actually tried to honor some of what Nebraska was. We're going to be physical on the lines. We're going to be physical in our run game. We're going to play, we're going to play to physical strengths. And he won, and he went 67-27 in his time there, but they fired him because he wasn't nice to people. Bottom line, they fired him because he was a dick. So, now they go on and hire, their homegrown guy, but his style just does not fit what they can do. And you ain't never going to get but so many Florida kids to be like, yeah, I'm going to Lincoln to hang out for because football season only lasts about 4 months,
True. Right. Well, let's hop into Miami versus Virginia. Tough fought game. Fish, you can start off talking about the game.
Yeah. I think the one thing that Miami's doing, and we've talked about this, and this is what good teams in general do, is another game. It was when I tell you it was raining, the rain was coming from the heavens last night. It was really bad, and it's a situation where you're playing another team that it's not easy to get up for these teams, and to be one of the better teams in your conference, you got to find a way to win, and they found a way to win yesterday when everything wasn't going right. They didn't have a lot of their offense, their passing offense, put up over 300 yards, but rushing, they ran the ball 48 times for 122 yards, and they didn't have the success that they've had earlier in the year. And you know what? They adjusted their offense to what was working, and they relied on King, and they made a couple big plays. But these are the games that you look back at the end of the year, and when you're 9-1, you had to gut some of these games out, and that's what Miami did. And I've talked about it over and over. A lot. You could sit there and go, well, they won only 19-14. Well, this is another game that in the last couple years they would have found a way to lose, and they did. And each one of these wins is one more bullet in the a notch in the belt. You're going to end up, when kids are recruiting, look at their their team and their record. They're not going to sit there and go, oh, well, they only beat Virginia 19-14. They're going to look and go, Miami's 5-1. Yeah. And the one loss they had was the Clemson team. And you know what? What's Miami going to sell? Hey, you're the difference between us winning and losing against Clemson. Mm-hmm. They have that one target now. They don't have all these other teams they keep knocking off. they have that one target, and that target's going to be Clemson. And these kids are going to start buying in because they're winning. And yeah, it wasn't pretty, but you know what? If you're watching their offense and their quarterback puts up 300 yards and they don't even have a number one receiver, you're going, hey, I'm a number one receiver. Why wouldn't I want to go play in that offense? So that's what kids look at. I know fans look at it differently, but these kids want to see that you're winning, and they're winning, and they continue to win each week. And you know, at the end of the game, it's who has the most chips, and they're lining up to have close to the most amount of chips on the table. So I think it was another good win for them. And next game up, they get a bye now. I think they could kind of figure out some of the things that haven't worked and worked the last few weeks, and they come off a bye and they'll end up playing at NC State. Then they have a couple other games. I think Virginia Tech and North Carolina will be their two toughest games at the end of the year. But Miami's looking at a record of possibly 9-10 wins this year. And, you know, before the season, they were projected by most experts, I think, to win 7 or 8. So they're far exceeding their expectations right now.
No doubt. I'm going to hop in. I thought this was King's best game as a Hurricane. Obviously, throwing over 300 yards and no turnovers. You can't ask your quarterback to be more efficient than that. Running game was average. Obviously, Virginia wanted to slow the game down because they knew they didn't want to get into a track meet with Miami. And obviously, you talked about the weather. That had an effect on the game. But right now, Coach Diaz has a confident program, a program that thinks they can beat anyone and compete with anyone. And that, that's scary. A top 10 team, a legit team. I love the direction of the program and what they have going on. And I think they're just going to get better. I mean, I think everyone in the country should now be on alert for the Miami Hurricanes. I'm telling you that right now. The way they're recruiting, the way that the coaches they have in there, the kids they have in there, the players are bought in. Manny's got that ball rolling. I think they're a hell of a program, and I look forward to watching them in the future. Corey?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, that they survived, a game against a team that, was the minute I saw that how much it was raining down there, I'm like, oh boy, Virginia, this plays right into their hands. They want a little mud pit bath of a game, and they got one. But Miami survived. I think King found himself a receiver in Michael Harley who had a 10 for a buck 70, had a big game, and that's going to help. It gives them a primary target. They're going to have to run the football better. They definitely got to get those running backs rolled up. I think Harris had 8 yards. Knighton had, let me see what Knighton had. He had
37 yards.
37, you're 12 for 37. Chaney, 10 for 43. So, your running backs right there, they're combining for 88 yards on 30 carries. That's bad. So they got to get better in that area. And that's something they really have to focus on. But like you said, the schedule sets up nicely. NC State on Friday in a couple of weeks. NC State's quarterback situation is horrible right now. Wake Forest and for Georgia Tech are games you can put in the bank. So, I mean, you're looking at 8 wins minimum, probably 9, if they can split one of these two with Virginia Tech and North Carolina. And I think that's if you'd ask any Hurricane fan if they'd have started this season, they'll take 9-2 right now. And, if they can figure out that quarterback spot in the future, they're up there competing as a championship team.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let's hop into the FSU Louisville game. I started off with here on this game. Obviously, FSU got beat handedly by Louisville. Noon game. Fish, like we talked about a couple weeks ago. It's hard for a team to get up 2 weeks in a row consistently for a game, right? It's very hard to do that. And it seemed like FSU didn't want to be there. I thought Louisville did a good job of making Travis a pocket quarterback. Obviously, FSU's passing game struggled. But a bright spot for FSU was the running game. I mean, they managed to get 265 yards on the ground. which was great to see. Not having Terry hurt them, which was evident. Defense struggled, giving up 569 yards and 48 points. This is not FSU defense. This is not what they're used to. This is not what we are used to seeing by an FSU or Florida type of defense. I think what FSU needs to do right now is they need to say, what do we do well and what can our players do well, and put them in those positions to be successful moving forward. Corey, go ahead.
I think, I was one of the guys who after last week, I felt like they were running into 3 games, this Louisville game, the game against Pitt, the game against NC State. It's all winnable games, potential swing games that would really determine where this thing was going to be headed. And yesterday, I thought they came out the gate, had very little. I mean, they had a nice little opening drive, but other than that, once Louisville realized they could hit big plays anytime they wanted to, that game was going to go downhill quickly. It's hard to say what FSU did well. Yeah, they ran the ball well, but they couldn't score. They didn't score any points in the second half for the second week in a row. They can't, running in between the 20s is nice, but but they couldn't do anything. They couldn't make the plays they needed to make, when they got into scoring areas. And that's a concern. They're figuring out Jordan Travis. We all said he can't pass, and now teams are starting to figure out how do we spy him? How do we defend him? How do we kind of box him in and force him to throw in the areas that we want him to throw in? Again, we can go on the defense. The defense has been putrid. It wasn't good last week, frankly. But, it should get better from an optics standpoint, because the teams they're facing down the stretch just aren't as good offensively. I mean, if Pitt comes out next week and gains 600 yards and scores 40 points, I'm going to fire everyone. Like, I'm dead serious. Like, if that happens, don't even wait. Like, you get rid of these guys because they can't get the job done. But it was a bad performance. This is a 1-4 Louisville team that scored 7 points the week before, and they absolutely dragged them up and down the field. It was about as bad of a look as they had. It reminded me far more of the Miami game than anything they had done in between there.
Mm-hmm. Fish?
The one thing is when you play with emotion like they played last week, they had a ton of emotion, is you got to be able to carry that over the following week. It's like they used every bit of energy and emotion last week. And I saw it early on. I felt, I missed the first touchdown drive, but it really didn't seem like they played with a whole lot of energy. And the one thing with Florida State, and you saw it in the North Carolina game, a few things went their way and it carried them throughout that whole game. This week, not so much. They lost that juice early on, and and that's a sign of a good or a bad team. We talked about it. For them to get to that next level where they're starting to be mentioned as a good team, you got to be able to win a big game and then come back the next week. Even if you don't play as well as you did, still be able to come out and compete and win. And they weren't even competitive. This was close to the Miami game, as far as there wasn't a whole lot. Jordan, I don't know if Jordan was hurt. I think he was hurt. He didn't look good. He looked beat up. He wasn't running hard. He didn't look like he was running hard like he's done in the past. I think the problem with their running game, they're going to put up a lot of numbers because they run the ball a lot. I don't think they have game breakers there. We discussed it before the season. Yeah. There's no Dalvin Cook. There's no Cam Akers. There's none of these guys. Listen, you can run the ball at any level if you want to. You don't need a great back to put up yards. But if you want to have a great running game, you need great backs, and they don't have them. And unless you have a great offensive line, which they don't have an offensive line that they could just line up and maul people. And we're starting to see the first game they were able to hide the fact that Terry didn't play. It was evident they didn't have anybody really a go-to guy to just open up their offense, against Louisville. This is a tough loss, but you know what? They have a bye week now. They are coming into the easier part of their schedule. They've played the tougher teams outside of Clemson. There really isn't a team that could just blow them off the map. I mean, Louisville was another team we discussed. They had 2 guys that basically could go the distance on any play in Hawkins and also Tutu Atwell. The rest of these teams don't have that. They're more conservative, and as long as FSU doesn't turn the ball over, they should be able to stay in most of these games. But this next, 4 or 5 games is huge because one, you want to show an identity that kids want to go and play there, and recruiting is the only way they're going to turn this around. And we've discussed it. I know fans are scheme, and we're going to be talking to a coach in a couple of minutes and ask him about that. But scheme's not real good if you don't have the players that can match up in that scheme. You could be, but there is something wrong. I don't know, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they got to figure some things out because, listen, I don't mind the yards. It's the yards. They give up chunk plays and 60, 70 yard touchdowns. It's one thing giving up 10 yards here, 20 yards there, but they're giving it away too easily. I mean, it's something they got to fix. But, we knew that if you knew this team like we've known it all year, I think all 3 of us have been on the same page. They're not a good football team. And it's not, this is something that I think the fans are just starting to realize that this team's not very good. And you're going to have these moments where they'll probably have another game where they play the North Carolina type game where they beat somebody and handle them all throughout. But I think you're going to see inconsistency all year like this. One game up, one game down, one game up. That's just the type of team they are. And the only way they're going to fix that is flipping that roster over, bringing in better players. They got to recruit. And I don't know if they're capable of doing it, but that's not my job. I'm not getting paid, $800,000, $1 million a year to figure that out.
Yeah.
But again, Fish. Before we conclude, where you're getting into the thing where it's just that we're harping on the players. These players, a lot of people in the country wanted these kids. It wasn't like they're getting kids from that going to Alabama State or they're going to San Jose State. Marvin Wilson could have thrown a coin and gone to any school he wanted to in the country. Janarius Robinson, Nick Saban wanted him. Travis Jay could have gone anywhere he wanted to go in the country. What do you call his name? Asante Samuel, one of the best cornerback prospects in the country. I agree.
Have
talent.
I agree. We've talked about this. They have talent, but these guys didn't recruit those kids. So when stuff goes wrong, these kids, they're like, all right, whatever you say, coach, too.
Here's my concern with this players thing. The idea that the players, it's their fault. They don't care, whatever. Memphis went 12-2, 13-2 last year. Those players cared. Memphis was still 90th against the run.
Yep.
Yeah,
so
true.
I'm going to say that. Memphis was still 90th against the run with players that clearly cared because they were top 10 all season. Yeah. And they still couldn't stop anybody.
So you're talking about Fuller, Adam Fuller, the defense coordinator.
Yeah, he was the defensive coordinator there. They still couldn't stop anybody.
That's true.
So
that's a good point.
Those kids cared. I'm pretty sure they cared a lot.
Yeah, but that's something that a lot of the fans are talking about. Oh, these kids don't care. These kids are terrible, blah, blah, blah. Hey, at the end of the day, like you said, Corey, something's not working. Something's not working. Something's not right there.
The kids are definitely not I'm not going to blame the players because at the end of the day, it's the job of the coaches to put them in position to succeed. But Don Brown said it last week on our show. He goes, you know what? When we win a game, the players get the credit, and that's how it is. And when we lose a game, we're going to take fault. And I think as a coach, you have to have that mentality. These guys are going to have to start, you saw it last week. They won a game, and it was like they won the Super Bowl. I mean, everybody from the administrators to the coaches, that's North Carolina. You shouldn't be celebrating like that.
Yeah.
It's a win. We're supposed to win. This is Florida State.
Correct.
Don't act like you're on that. Act like you've been there before. Coaches always say when you score, act like you've been there before. They acted like they never been there. So
they haven't. They haven't.
Well, I guess not. But like I said, I'm about done with this subject.